Hey everyone, Kevin P. McAuliffe here for Lowepost.com, and I'm back again with the next lesson in our Fairlight Essentials tutorial series. And in this lesson, we're going to get an introduction to the Fairlight interface. We're going to talk about the inspector, metadata, meters, the mixer, the sound library, index, the effects library, and the media pool. Now we've got a lot to talk about, so let's keep our introduction short. Let's jump into Fairlight. And let's get started. All right, as you can see, we are in the Fairlight panel, and to get rolling with this lesson, I want to talk about all of the common things that you're probably already aware of, or things that are familiar to you from working in other panels inside of Resolve, more specifically the Edit panel. Now, right at the top center of the screen, you're going to notice that we have our transport controls and our toolbar. Transport controls, fairly self-explanatory. Rewind, fast forward, play, stop, record, and loop play. Now, next to the loop play option, we have this little icon that looks like it could be a keyframe or it could be a film strip. Now, what this tool actually is it's our automation tools. Now, we're not going to talk about automation in this lesson. That's a little bit of a step up from what we're talking about now. We do have a lesson dedicated to automation coming up in this course, but I just want to make you aware that we do have access to that tool from right here within our audio timeline. Now, below this, we have our toolbar where we can get in, choose the selection tool to choose a single clip, or we can get in and drag around a bunch of clips to select multiple clips at the same time. We also have the ability to get in and use our razor blade tool, as well as getting in, adjusting snapping, adding flags to our clips, and even adding markers to our timeline. Now, I already have a marker in my timeline that I've come in and I've called appropriately enough Kevin's marker. And of course, we love markers. Now, you'll see where this comes into play in just a couple minutes. Now, I did talk in the previous lesson about our zooms to be able to zoom in on our clips, as well as zooming in and out on our timeline. And I want to now jump back into our timeline options for just 1 second here, because one of the most common problems that you're going to run into when working in Fairlight is what I call the JKL trap. Now, what do I mean by the JKL trap? Well, what we're going to do here is I'm just going to adjust the size of my timelines here just a little bit. I'm just going to give myself a little bit more space on the VO track. And let's just zoom in just a little bit here, not too crazy. Okay. Let's just pan over. I'm just using the middle mouse button to pan over, and here is our voiceover tracks. I'm also going to solo them for just 1 second. So here's what I like to call the JKL trap. I'm going to have my hands on JKL on the keyboard. What I'd like to do is I'd like to pick a point where I'd like to add an edit to this clip here. So normally what the process is you hit play.
The highlight of my week.
And I'm just going to, I'm going to stop there, and maybe I'd like to rewind that. Oh, okay, I got to stop. Oh, no, I'm going to play a little bit further forward. You know what? I think what I'm going to do instead is I'm just going to drag. You know what? This really isn't working. Let's use JKL again, and that's what I like to refer to as the JKL trap. Now, I call it that because it's one of those tools where once you start working with it, you can really fall into a trap of it becoming a time vampire. Now, what do I mean by it being a time vampire? Well, I just mean that it's something that you end up just doing seemingly forever. And you really don't want to do that. Now, here's where our timeline options are going to come into play, our timeline view options. Now, we've talked about this in a previous course, timeline view options and audio view options. But we haven't talked about the scroller, which is probably one of my favorite tools inside of Fairlight. And you can see it's tucked away inside of the timeline view options. And we have 3 choices in here. We have video, we have audio 1, and audio 2. Now, audio 1 and audio 2 can be interchangeable with any one of the tracks we have inside of our timeline. So what I'm going to do is just turn one of these audio tracks on. And once I turn the audio track on, you're going to notice the audio scroller appear down at the bottom of the screen. And you'll notice that right now it's displaying my voiceover track of audio 1. Now keep in mind, like I said, we could change this to whatever we want, but we'll stick with voiceover on track 1 because what I wanted to do is to become really precise. I wanted to know exactly what I was getting as far as my audio goes. Instead of using JKL, I'm just going to grab the mouse and drag, or drag really slow, or even slower, or fast. And this is a fantastic way for you to get in and very easily find the exact point where you'd like to put in an edit, maybe even right there, by hearing it, almost like you're sort of grabbing that reel-to-reel machine and slowing it down. This scroller is a fantastic way to get through and scrub through this audio with super precise precision, quickly and easily. Okay, and like I said, tucked away inside of the timeline view options, and to be honest, I normally leave the audio scroller at the bottom of the screen. Now, to be honest, you could have all three of them up at the same time, but for me, I find that just to be a little bit confusing, and the video I normally never use. The video for me is only as a reference for things like sync, so I'm just going to shut that off, and I'm going to shut audio 2 off as well, so that I only have that one scroller at the bottom of the screen. Now, a couple other things. We have the inspector. The inspector, fairly self-explanatory, much like it is inside of the editing panel. I'll just call it the inspector, select a clip. Keep in mind, when we're selecting a clip, we are looking at the clip's parameters. This is not the track's parameters or the bus's parameters. It's simply the clip's parameters. And I know this because if you take a look, we have some inherent clip-based parameters with these clips, meaning parameters that are physically attached to these clips that I don't need to apply an effect to get access to. You'll see volume, pan, patch, as well as a clip equalizer. And you'll also notice we have the ability to keyframe from in this window as well. Now, we're going to talk about EQ in its own dedicated lesson, but I got a little sort of sneak peek coming up later in this lesson where I've actually done an EQ not to a clip, but to a track. This way, I've now gotten in and don't have to do that to each one of the individual clips. If I actually do the EQ at the track level, it will be applied as I play through all of the clips. Okay, so keep that in mind. Now, a couple other common things that you're probably already aware of. Metadata, fairly self-explanatory. Select any clip you want. Get all the metadata information for that clip. Let's jump on over here to the left to the media pool. Now, what I'm going to do here is actually just start opening a whole bunch of windows at the same time. And you can notice very quickly that if you don't open and close windows, you can run into problems real quick with screen real estate. I'm only working with one screen here. And if I don't open and close these panels as necessary, you can run out of screen real estate real quick. Now, there's really only one window that we need to have open, but I'm going to get to that in just a second. Much like with the media pool working in the edit panel, we can select clips, we can mark in and out points, take those clips, drag them and drop them into our timeline to add elements as we go. Now, in most cases, that type of work is going to be done when working with sound effects. But I'm going to get to the sound library in just a second. So let's close the media pool. Let's close the metadata window. Let's close the inspector. Let's talk about pretty much the one window that you're going to have open. I'd probably say about 90 to 95% of the time, and that's your meters window. Now the meters window is fairly self-explanatory. It's going to give you the VU meters represented for each track that we have in our audio timeline. Now it's also very cool. You'll notice there's audio 1, 2, 3, and there are 2 stereo audio tracks, 4 and 5. We can actually see that it's now doubled up on those VU meters to give us the stereo audio as a visual display up here in the meters window. You'll see we also have access to checking out our master output. We also have access to loudness control, which we're going to talk about loudness in its own dedicated lesson because loudness metering is exceptionally important, especially if you're delivering for broadcast. Your audio will have to meet specific loudness standards or it will be rejected by the broadcaster. Last but certainly not least, of course, we have our video over here so that we can hit play, see everything in sync, and we'll be all good to go. Now, one thing I should point out is that if you take a look over here on the left, I have my time code for our audio sequence. 01010916, 01011716. Not quite what we're looking for. So what I now need to do is get in and just quickly adjust the audio, or pardon me, the time code for this clip. So let's do this. You'll notice, or pardon me, not for the clip, but for the timeline. You'll notice that our visual starts at 01000800. Let's jump to the media pool. Let's come to our rough sound timeline. I'm going to right click on it, come to timelines, set our starting time code, and we'll just punch in an 8 here. Say OK. You'll now see 8. We can hit play. And what I now need to do is to actually, get a little bit of a better visual representation of exactly what's going on with this time code, because as much as I want to be looking over here, then looking over here, I really don't want to do that. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to navigate up to my workspaces, and I'm going to come right down here to my time code window, which, whoa, massive, haha. Let's take that, let's just shrink it way down. I'm just going to position it right here. Actually, let's position it right under that time code. hit play so we can double check that everything lines up. And keep in mind, we can just move this while we're playing if we want to. For me personally, I normally like to have this time code window somewhere. And since I actually am not using any of these meters here, I'm going to place it right there just so that I always have access to it and I can always see exactly what's going on with the time code of this sequence. Okay, now a couple other windows that is important for me to show you. Let's just close this for right now. You'll take a look over here. We have our meters and we have our mixer. Now the mixer is I'm going to call it a daunting tool. It's daunting when you first look at it because you might just think, oh, it's a mixer, not a big deal, got some faders. Keep in mind, when we're talking about working inside of Fairlight, we're actually working at basically three main levels. We work with audio at the clip level, we work with it at the track level, and we work with it at the bus level. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, working with audio at the clip level is what I showed you before. We come to our clip, we select it, maybe I want to come to the inspector, make some adjustments in here. We've adjusted the audio on this clip specifically, okay? Then we have the ability to work with audio at the track level, meaning what I do to the track as far as adding effects go, as far as adding EQ go, dynamics, that type of stuff. What I do to the track impacts every piece of audio that's on that track. Okay, kind of like in video when you nest things down into one little nested clip and you apply an effect to that, same concept. Then you can also work at what's called the bus level, which again, we're going to talk about all this in upcoming lessons. What you have the ability to do inside of Fairlight is to take multiple tracks and combine them into single buses. So for example, let's say you have a scene where it's in the desert and you've gone through and you've got 87 channels of sound effects that you've got perfectly. And what you now realize is that there's actually going to be dialogue that's going to be coming in over top of those sound effects clips. What you have the ability to do is to take those sound effects clips and assign them to a bus. One bus that you can now take and adjust its levels that will then uniformly adjust all the levels of all of those sound effects together. Okay? Keep in mind, what you apply to the bus trickles down to everything else that's attached to it. That's to the multiple tracks, to the multiple clips that are attached. So you can see, things can get very daunting very quickly if you're not paying attention to what you're doing. And when I say when you're not paying attention to what you're doing, this is about being organized. I'm assuming at this point that most of, I'll say 99% of your audio should be in your timeline once you get to this point. Whether it's mixed or not, the audio should at least be in there because you don't want to be spending days in here doing sound design. I mean, to be honest, you could, but the whole point is the more time you spend doing sound design, the less money you're making per hour. Okay? So you want to get as much of that in here as possible. So what you're doing inside of Fairlight is mixing. Okay? Now you'll take a look here and you'll see, much like I said before, we can adjust pan, dynamics, EQ, effects, and even what buses are going into what channels right here in the mixer. Now you'll also notice here that I've gotten in and I've actually added an EQ to this track, not to the actual clip.
I lost my job with Price Waterhouse back in the early 80s when the global recession hit.
Okay, and you'll see that if I go through,
she said
audio sounds fine on each clip. So this was a very quick telephone EQ that I just quickly whipped up to add to this track. But I've disabled it just for the purpose of you hearing the audio the way it originally sounded. And what I'm going to do is just double click on the EQ to call up the equalizer for this specific track. I'm going to turn it on. And what I actually have the ability to do is to play the clip with the equalizer window open here.
I lost my job with Price Waterhouse back in the early 80s when the global recession hit.
Okay, so we can actually turn this off.
My wife left me. She said I was dull,
okay. Now we should be soloing that track.
A creature of habit.
But he sounds very much like he's talking to us on a phone. And again, this was something that I whipped up very quickly just before I started recording this tutorial so you can get an idea of working on the track level. Now keep in mind, I could also apply this to a bus as well to have it trickle down to everything that's attached to it. Okay, let's move on. Let's just close the mixer. I'm going to head on over. Let's jump over to the effects library because again, fairly self-explanatory. Much like in the edit panel, you can take any one of the effects in here, simply take them and drag them and drop them at the clip level, or you have the ability right here to add an effect to a track level or to a bus level very quickly and very easily. Now we also have the index window. The index window works very similar to the index window inside of the edit panel. You'll see What I have access to in here is the different tracks as well as any markers that I have on my audio timeline. But what's great about this working in the index window is this is where, let's just say hypothetically today, I only wanted to work on my voiceover and on-camera dialogue. I could actually hide the other tracks so that I don't see them, so that we now only have visibility to these audio tracks. So just in case I had, 82 tracks of audio, I can really focus in on the tracks that I only need to see at any given time. Now, what I want to do with this lesson is I just want to wrap up by talking about the sound library. We're going to talk about ADR in its own dedicated lesson. ADR, Automated Dialogue Replacement. Let's come to the sound library. And the sound library is very interesting. What the sound library is it's a way that you can index sound effects that you already have located on your system, so that you quickly and easily have access to them inside of Fairlight. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to hide out of DaVinci Resolve for a second. I'm just going to come to my media drive. You'll see that if I come down here to the bottom, let's just close up my windows here. I have a folder called, appropriately enough, SFX. In here I have a folder called FF2448 and a bunch of different sound effects categories with just an absolute ton of sound effects in here. Okay. And what I did, I think there was about 5,000 sound effects in those folders. And what I had to do is I actually had to add the library. Now, once I added the library, Resolve went through and indexed each one of the clips. And I think for about 5,000 sound effects, it took about 2.5 hours. So keep in mind, your mileage will vary based on your system, the speed of your hard drive, speed of Resolve, etc., etc., etc. But the beauty part about this is that now, let's say I was working on the part of the show where we were actually in the restaurant, and I needed to find some sound effects for this particular scene. All I need to do is simply come up to the search window, type in restaurant, and you'll see that what Resolve immediately does is it finds all of the clips that have restaurant tagged in the metadata, and all I now need to do if I want to preview it is simply come down. Maybe I want to hear the fountain soda machine. I can now come through. You can hear that there. Or maybe I want to hear somebody close the freezer door. Okay, let's just scan down quickly here. There we go. There's the door closing. And you can see we can come through now and really start to design the audio that we want to design. Now, I do want to mention that this is not a course about sound design. It's obviously a course about Fairlight and more specifically about mixing. So we're not going to be doing a lot of sound design, but I will get in and show you how we can get in and do things like Audition in this window in a later lesson. Now, you also have to decide what workflow is best for you. Do you want to do most of your sound effects and sound work by adding the sound clips in the edit page, or is it better for you to do it inside of the Fairlight page? The great thing inside of Resolve is that it's really up to you. All right, I think that's a good place to leave off for this lesson. Keep in mind that we value your feedback. If you have any questions or comments, please head on over and post them in our forums at lowepost.com/forums. This has been Kevin P. McAuliffe. Thanks a lot for watching.